Good afternoon, Peter Carson here, and welcome to our webinar on compliance and document collection with external parties. Quick intros for those of you that are not familiar with me. Peter Carson here, President of Extranet User Manager, also an Office Apps and Services MVP. I've got my contact details in here. We will be sharing the deck and the recording, so you have access to all that information after the fact. Also, for those of you not familiar with Extranet User Manager, we're going to be talking a fair bit about the product side as well as the scenario side through here. The product's actually been around for more than 10 years now. It's evolved a lot over the years, and certainly over the last 5 years or so, we put a lot of focus into what Microsoft is doing from an Office 365 point of view and Azure Active Directory business to business, and really making that into the product. And what we're going to talk about today is very much what you can do out of the box with the Microsoft products, as well as how we've extended that in a number of different customer scenarios that both do and don't require our products as well. So don't worry, this is not a big sales pitch. It's really to take you through some actual scenarios and talk about what that looks like. So we've done the introductions. What I'm going to do before I actually get into the specific document collection scenarios, I do want to take people through what the out of the box experience looks like, both from a OneDrive request files scenario and from an external sharing in SharePoint Online. And then we'll take you through some specific customer scenarios. We're not actually naming the customers, but you'll get a sense of sort of the industry and scale of those customers as we go through those scenarios. We do have the Q&A section open, so feel free to post questions through there as we're going through. We've got Amanda, Andrew, Logan, and Eric on the line as well moderating, so where they can, they'll answer those, and I'll try and pause and have a look at those as I go through as well. Before we do start though, always love to get a sense of how people are using the technology today. So this is a very quick poll, just really asking about how do you share with external parties today? Do you use OneDrive, SharePoint Online, Teams, file transfer protocol, third-party solutions, Box, Dropbox, things like that. So you can use the bit.ly link on the screen. The easier way I find is actually just take your phone out, open your camera app and point it at the QR code. Normally I hate QR codes, but they're actually handy in this scenario here. You don't actually take a picture of it. It'll just pop up a prompt on your camera app saying, hey, do you want to open this link? And it'll take you to the Microsoft Forms poll. It's really easy to quickly answer that through the phone as you go through there. So we'll have a look back at that later, but love to get people's input from that point of view. Okay, so as we get into demo side, let me take my smiling mug off of the picture here and send that live, just to get a little more screen real estate to have a look at things as we're going through. So not sure if people are familiar with the request files feature in OneDrive for Business. It's actually a pretty cool feature, and it's really handy for the right scenarios. Microsoft announced it, I think it was about 2 years ago, 2 Ignites previously. So it's been there for a while now. It's kind of hidden, so if you're not aware of it, you may not discover it yourself. But really the idea is that you've got the need to collect files from colleagues, from external guest users, and really want privacy between that. All those files that you're collecting are likely for a common purpose. You can't have uploaders seeing each other content in that context. Maybe it's suppliers or customers or what have you. There needs to be privacy between them, so they should only see their own content. But you want to be able to share that link out with a broad set of people. So let's actually go over to my browser here, and I'm signed into my actual live OneDrive for Business with Envision IT account here. I've created a folder called Demo that I'm going to use for demo purposes here. So what I would do is create a folder for the purpose that I want to collect documents. Let's say I was running a tender process and I wanted people to submit RFP documents. So I could create a folder called RFP Submissions here. Go ahead and create that. And when I select that folder, you'll see up in the ribbon here, this Request Files option pops up. So if I click that, the name for the request can be independent from the name for the folder. I tend to keep them the same just to not confuse myself as to what I was doing where. I go ahead and say next there. And basically there's a link here that you can give to people to say, hey, here's where I need you to send in your RFP submissions. You can have Microsoft send it out on your behalf through email. I prefer to copy the link, paste it into my own message, put some context around it, let people know what they're going to be doing from that point of view, and then go in from there. So let's actually open up a new private window here. and go to that link that I'd copied off my clipboard. So imagine I got an email saying, hey, if you're going to submit a submission for this RFP tender, please come to this link to upload your documents. So because I'm in private, Microsoft doesn't know who I am. I could be anybody at this point here. And it says, hey, based on that link that you just gave me, that came from Peter Carson, and he's requesting files for RFP submissions. So you've got a little context given to the user as to what they're going to be doing here. So if I say here, I want to select some files, so let me actually go to my demo documents folder, just grab a couple of documents here, go ahead and open. So yeah, those are the 3 files that I want to add. I can add more if I want. I can say, whoops, I didn't mean to add that one. I can exit out. And remember, I'm in anonymously, so it doesn't know who I am. I can put whoever I want in here. I can say, hey, I want John Doe. So it doesn't really validate who's submitting this file. So it depends on the context as to whether that's appropriate in your scenario or not. Let's go ahead and do that upload. So it does the upload. It doesn't actually show me the result from that. So I can't come back later and say, okay, what did I upload? It's basically a black box that I drop files into. I can say, yeah, I want to upload some more files in here under the same name and go ahead and add more files. Let's flip back now to my OneDrive and into the RFP submissions. And let's have a look at what happened there. So it took the text that I typed in as my name, John Doe, and it prefixed each of the files that got uploaded with that name in there. So I can see who contributed to that because they're all going to come in as guest contributor here. If 10 different people submit through here, they're all going to show as guest contributor here, but whatever name they assigned as they uploaded those documents show up in here. So I could build some rules, maybe start to organize this to say, okay, I want to have folders by person. I could have a Power Automate workflow that I build when there's new documents dropped in here that does certain things from there. So you can start to extend the solution and make it a little more sophisticated. Remember, though, that this is running in my OneDrive for Business. So it's not a team site. It's not sort of a shared repository. It's in my OneDrive. I could share this folder with other people within my organization if I want other people to see this, but it's really intended as a sort of a personal collection spot from there. You probably don't want to build a full enterprise solution around somebody's OneDrive from that point of view. So this is what we'll talk about as we go through the session. There's this idea of sort of out of the box is great from an unstructured, hey, I just want a quick way to collect some files from people. This works really well. If it becomes a more formal process that you're going through, maybe this isn't appropriate from there. So let's talk about a different scenario from an out of the box point of view and how we actually use the external sharing features with our clients. So VRX Therapy is a pro bono project that we're doing. We use it for demo purposes as well to kind of illustrate some of the technology. And this is leveraging in our Extranet User Manager product. You don't need to use this. What I talk about here today will be very much in the context of out of the box as well. But basically what we do with our product, we add in a web part here that allows me to invite in external people that are working on the project, add additional users through here. Oops. I can send out a private registration link if I want people to sign up through here. And then I can define rules in this site that says, how is this shared out? And basically what we do when we're working with clients, we have a template for a client site that we use every time we're spinning up a new client. And we have the out-of-the-box team site as the starting point for that, and it's got a shared documents library. We also add a private documents library to that as well. And the idea is that things that we're going to share out with external people through here, they're going to see the site as a whole, and they're going to see everything that's in the shared documents library, but they're not even going to be aware that this private documents library exists. So you can do all that just with out-of-the-box permissions and features through here. If I look at the permissions on the shared documents library, so if I come up here, and I look at my library settings, and I say, okay, what are the permissions for this document library? It's actually inheriting from its parent, which is the site itself. And okay, we've got the actual groups in here, like that VRX Therapy group that we're inviting the external people in, have edit access into that. So sometimes we share read-only, sometimes we share edit, depends on the nature of the client and how closely we're working together, whether we want them simply to use this as a spot to retrieve files, or whether it's somewhere we're going to co-author and work together. In this particular example, we actually co-author and work together from that point of view. But if I come to the private documents library, and I look at the library settings on this one, and the permissions here, we'll see that it has unique permissions, and that external group is not listed in here. So only staff have access into this library here. So you can set your permissions up appropriately, and this is all part of the templates that we apply when we're creating our sites. And then people don't really need to think about it. They come to the site and they say, hey, if I put something in shared documents, I know it's going to be shared with those external parties. If I put it in private, it's private from there. We find that works better than saying, okay, let's do individual sharing, which you can still do to say, hey, I want to take this image here and I want to share it out. I have a bunch of different options in there. We've actually set this site up to default to the people with existing access, which means we're not going to change any rules on this file. We're just going to give you a link to that file. You can actually override that and say, hey, I want to actually share it with specific people. And it doesn't need to be people in that group that I was showing. I could share it with anybody that I'm allowed to through the rules in the organization. And you can set those rules. You can say, okay, what are allowed domains or blacklisted domains that I can share with through that? You can define that this site, I can't invite new people in through this process. I can only share with existing people. There's a lot of control and granularity around how you set that up. You can even say, hey, I want to share with anyone with this link. This sounds very scary for a lot of people, but it's actually not. It's a preferred way to just attaching that to an email attachment and sending it to people. Because when you send the email attachment, you've lost control as soon as you hit send button. You can forward that on to other people. You can't control, you can't revoke access to that. Whereas if you send them one of these links here, you can set expiries on this, you can set a password on it, you can lock it down to not allow editing. You can even make it so that you can block the download on that. So you can get very granular as to how people can use those links. And even if you change your mind and say, okay, before May 8th, we need to pull this back because it's gotten out of control, you can just expire that link and it's no longer valid. So whether I properly received that link from you or maybe it got re-forwarded to somebody that shouldn't have it, doesn't matter. You can yank it back from everybody and they lose access from that. And if you block download to it, you can feel confident that that file is not existing out in the ether and other spots. I mean, there's always ways around. You can take digital pictures of your screen to capture stuff that you're not supposed to be looking at from an information protection point of view. There's even tricks they do with shimmering screens to make it hard for cameras and such from that point of view. You can keep upping the bar. At that point, though, you kind of have to acknowledge that the person that's stealing your information in that scenario knows that they are. They're not making a mistake. They're deliberately trying to circumvent controls you've put in place and break rules you have around how you want to structure that. So those are some of the things that you can do from an out-of-the-box point of view. The request files I find handy. Let's say I'm doing a session like this, but it's a joint session, and I've got different presenters with different sessions. And we need to collect the decks from them. And doing that request files to request PowerPoints. It's a great way to get the presentation decks from speakers from that perspective. Or in this scenario here, I've got a certain set of people that I need to share everything out about that particular project. Using the out-of-the-box sharing features, maybe augment that and extend that with what we do with Extranet User Manager, makes a lot of sense as well. So that was the request file side, as well as the the standard sharing features that we have in there. We don't really have time today, but I've done previous talks. You can go back in our events history that go much deeper into how you control the policies around who can share what. And who they're allowed to share it with and things like that. So you can get fairly granular in terms of how you set that up, both organization-wide as well as for a particular site collection. And the more that you do to template sites and have some governance and structure around how sites can be created, you can set those rules as part of that process. We have a whole open source solution. We use Orchestry with some clients, which is a third-party solution for doing that templating and setting up of the sites. So I encourage you to think about something like that if you don't have that in place today. Okay, so some of the tips, just kind of recapping on what I just talked about. When you set those organizational level policies, by definition, they are across your whole organization. And they have to be as relaxed as any one site needs to be. If you say, hey, I don't want to use this anyone style sharing on any site except this one particular site, you still have to set your organization to allow anyone sharing. Then you have to set the site collection policies on every other site to say, don't allow it on these sites, which is why it's so important to have a process around the setup of those sites and perhaps some review and governance processes around checking those configurations to make sure they're appropriate. But don't be afraid of that anyone link sharing. In the right context, it actually makes a lot of sense. And look at the additional sharing settings, things like limiting sharing by domain. You can say, hey, we only have these trusted partners that we share with, or we're okay with sharing with everybody, but we don't want public services like Hotmail and Gmail. You decide what those look like. You can have things like verification codes that must re-authenticate to verify that, hey, they're using credentials that are still valid. This one's really important. Guests must sign in with the same account of invitations were sent to. You want to make sure the person you're invited is the person that's receiving it. They haven't forwarded it or accepted it with a personal email box. If you wanted to partner with that organization, make sure it is that organization that you're partnering with. Set your defaults and figure out the template size. So things to think about from a standard external sharing point of view. Okay, so that's kind of the out of the box. Now let's talk about some actual scenarios and take you into what we've actually done with this and how we can extend and really make things more sophisticated around the sharing. So the first scenario is a fairly complex one. It's a publicly traded organization. The parent organization has dozens of subsidiaries. And each of those subsidiaries are their own legal entity. So they have their own financial reporting requirements, but obviously that needs to roll up to the parent level. There's monthly, quarterly, annual auditing reporting package that each of the subsidiaries have to provide at a certain point in time. So it's really important. There's strict schedules on there, particularly quarterly earnings calls need to come out on time for a publicly traded company. You got to make sure that you've got everything at the appropriate time, that you can be prepared for those calls and be set from that point of view. Now the finance staff, there's multiple finance staff at different subsidiaries, but sometimes those finance staff cover multiple subsidiaries as well. So they might have to upload 6 different packages of a dozen different documents for their monthly reporting requirements from that point of view. So how can we manage that? We can obviously do that through a SharePoint site. The challenge was that it can be a little complex for people to understand how they can actually do that and properly tag everything and organize things. Particularly if those people at the subsidiaries are not Microsoft 365 tenant users themselves, they may not be familiar with SharePoint Online, and the idea of, while it sounds easy to just drag and drop some documents and tag them, that can be fairly overwhelming for people, and they can easily make mistakes through that process. So let's actually go into to the example scenario that we've got going here. Sorry, get to the right window. Okay, so I'm in my demo tenant here. We've got the customer portals we've set up for the finance group here. And let me kind of walk you through a bit of the information architecture that we've set up in SharePoint to support this. So the first thing is, we've got a number of subsidiaries here, and we've got a finance library. Actually, let me go back to the all documents view here. And what we've done is we've created folders for each subsidiary. And within each folder, for each reporting period, we create what's called a document set for that reporting period. Now, this is all scripted and automated. So there's a schedule, and there's some Azure automation and PowerShell that runs that says, hey, this is the reporting period. This is when it opens up. We need to create these document sets in these folders according to that schedule. So once we've got this configured, it all just kind of runs, and people don't need to go and create all this. The document sets get created for them. And if you're not familiar with document sets, I'd encourage you to have a look at them. They're an oft overlooked feature of SharePoint Online. Basically, it's a folder that you can apply metadata to. So you can see on the right here, we got some properties that lit up when I clicked on that document set. So if I do edit all on here, let's have a look at those properties. So the content type is the document set itself. It's got a name that we assigned through that scripting process, a period that it applies to, and a status. Is this open for reporting, or is it now closed? The reporting period's finished, and we shouldn't allow any more submissions into this document set. What reporting type is this? Is a monthly, a quarterly, an audit, an annual package? And what subsidiary and customer schedule does this apply to? Because different subsidiaries have different things that they need to provide. The reporting requirements are not exactly the same across all subsidiaries. So we group them into groups. This one falls into the A group, and they have a list of documents that they need to submit as part of that. So as I said before, nobody manually sets this up. The parent level finance team doesn't need to worry about this. These document sets just get created for all the subsidiaries as the reporting period opens according to the schedule that the finance team has set. So that's nice. That's great. I can come into this document set and I can start dragging and dropping documents in here. So let's actually come to my demo documents that I had over here. And let's say I just want to drag this Excel in. This is out of the box functionality. I can drop it in here and it gets uploaded for me. And because I've uploaded it into the document set, if I select on that and edit its properties, it's inherited a bunch of properties from the document set. So that's pretty cool. I didn't need to do anything as the person uploading to say this is for this subsidiary, this reporting type and period, and it's open. That's all done for me automatically just by nature of putting that document into the document set. But you'll notice there's a difference to a bunch of the other files that are in here. I'll show you how these files got created in a second. So the files are tagged with the document type. And this is important because we need to know, what different document types do we require from the subsidiary, and do we have them all or not? Because as we get close to the end of the reporting period, we need to send out alerts and notifications to the subsidiaries to say, hey, you've started putting your package together, but you're still missing these two document types that we need to close the finance out. If we don't have that tagging on there, it's difficult to be able to plan that out. Yes, I can select an item here. I can go over to my information panel here. I can click on the edit all, and I can say, okay, that document type is a CEO, CFO certification. And I can save that. And now I've got that document type applied and I'm good to go. But that was, there's a lot of options in here. There's a lot of things. And if I'm not familiar with this interface, it can be a little onerous. I mean, in this scenario here, they're all part of the same organization, but imagine these were people outside of your organization. Asking them to do this properly in SharePoint can be a little challenging. The other thing is, and we see this in a lot, in fact, we saw it in the OneDrive for Business example, there's often a naming convention that you want to have to these files. These are all going to get pulled down and used as part of a package outside of SharePoint Online, and having something called budget.xlsx is not that informative when I pull that down. Yes, I've got metadata here, but as soon as I take it out of SharePoint and put it somewhere else, I've lost all that metadata. So it'd be nice if the file name actually represented what that was. So what we did for them is we actually created a more customer-friendly portal, and we built a custom web part in here that allows us to drag and drop files and tag them appropriately through there. I'm actually going to do this in private window. Let me just hang on a second here. Okay, so I'm signed into Chrome here as a person from the outside who needs to upload documents. So rather than interacting directly with SharePoint, let's come back to my documents that I've got here. Let's actually use that same budget.xl file that I dropped manually. So this is all custom now. So we built this as an add-on web part to the solution. It's built using what's called the SharePoint framework. It fits very nicely into SharePoint Online, into Teams, and other architectures from there. So we've got some specific rules. We say, okay, what subsidiary are you uploading for? Well, we're going to do it for sub 1. And what's the period? And this knows which periods are open and are not, and it only shows me the open periods. We're trying to make this, idiot-proof or simple to use, so people have as few choices as possible. It makes it much more likely they're not going to go astray and do the wrong things through here. So I know my subsidiary. In fact, this list of subsidiaries will only show the subsidiaries that I have access to. So if I'm a CFO for sub 1 and that's the only subsidiary that I'm responsible for, I wouldn't even see sub 2 and sub 3 as part of that. So I picked my sub, I picked my period, and now I need to tell it what document type. So remember, there was a lot of metadata on the documents. The only thing we care about from the person that's uploading in here, what type of document is this? Is this a P&L that I'm uploading? Okay, go ahead and mark that as P&L. If I made a mistake, I can delete that out. I can drag and drop multiple files in here, but when I'm happy and I'm ready, I go ahead and hit the upload button. It takes a little bit for it to upload. What's happening under the hood is it's actually posting to a Logic App workflow, and that workflow is applying a bunch of rules. And I'll show you in a minute what's happening under the hood there. So let's come back to our main view here. In fact, we were in the finance documents. Let's just look at it from this perspective. And we'll see there's a new document that just got dropped in there. It's got the word budget in its name, but it actually went through a renaming process. So if we look at the properties on this, so there's its full name. So we've prefixed it with the subsidiary, with the reporting period, with the document type, and the original file name. So we've kind of taken all the metadata that is important to this particular document, and we've made it part of the name. You don't normally do that in SharePoint. You let people use the metadata as it's intended to be, but in this particular scenario, we know these are going to get pulled down and used in other repositories as well that don't have that same metadata features. So this makes it very clear exactly what that document is. I picked P&L as the document type when I upload it, so we've got that in there. We've got all the other information through here. We can actually see down here is the original file name that I uploaded through there, so I can see what that person actually uploaded from that point of view. And excuse me, this naming structure actually understands if I was to upload a replacement, let's say that was the wrong P&L and I upload a new one. You know, this is a compliance and records keeping system. We can't erase the fact that there was one there before, but we can add a new naming structure and call this one a V2. Again, normally I would hate to say that. I'd like to use version history in SharePoint to manage that. But in this case, we want all of that version history immediately evident right in the files themselves. So everything's obvious and apparent from that perspective. So that tagging all happened very easily. All I did was drag and drop to that web part, answer a couple questions, hit go, and it uploaded it for me. So let's have a look under the hood at what was actually happening with this. We're using a product from Microsoft called Logic Apps, and it's a workflow tool. It's a no-code solution that allows you to build quite complex workflows around processes like this. And you can see here's my upload that just happened there. We've got a few in there. I'm not sure which is the right one. Let's see if this is the correct one. Yep, that looks good. So the way the workflow, even though it's called a no-code solution, I mean, you do need to have often sort of some technical ability to build these out. This one's using what's called an HTTP request. So that web part, when I hit the upload button, is sending a post to this Logic app. It knows the URL of the Logic app, and it's triggering that workflow. And it's sending the file along as part of that. In fact, if we look at the request, we'll get technical for a second, we can actually see the name of the file name, the original, you know, all the metadata is being passed as arguments through here. And this base 64, it's hard to see here, but all those letters and numbers actually represent the contents of that Excel file. So it's actually passed the contents of the file and all the metadata into this workflow. And the workflow goes through a bunch of decisions. It initializes variables. We may have multiple files uploaded at once through here, so it goes through each. This only had the one file in there. And it basically validates to say, hey, is everything okay? If it's not, let's log some failures for there, but this looked good. So what we want to do is go create that file in the SharePoint portal. So it's putting that file name in, it's passing the content across and actually creating that file in SharePoint. It gets some metadata back. It tweaks some metadata because we can do it all as part of the initial file creation. And when we're all done, we increment success and we pass that result back to the web part. So the web part says, hey, this all worked. And that's what threw up that success message saying your upload is completed. So things like rules around the renaming and how that works, we can actually bake that into the Logic app. We can set permissions on files. We can put them in different locations. So, you know, all those decisions can be part of this Logic app that drive what happens with that document and where it ends up in here and who has visibility to it. You know, and the idea is that the folks at the subsidiaries, they have visibility into this. They can see their subsidiary with all their file submissions and what their status is and such from that point of view. But they can't actually change anything through SharePoint directly. They have read-only access into here. So they have to go through that web part. They have to go through that workflow. They can't do what I did, which was just, you know, arbitrarily drag and drop a document in there and have it upload. Kind of locked it down that they have to follow the steps. And that way we've got governance and control around how that works. Now there's another piece here we haven't finished yet. I can't show you. I'm going to show you a different example in a different scenario in a second, which is around the reporting. So we've got all this rich data and all this rich metadata in here. We can actually point Power BI, which is a business intelligence tool from Microsoft, at this SharePoint site. And it can pull all this metadata, all this document information, all the lookups around schedules and subsidiaries out of SharePoint, build a data model and build some visualization. So we can say, okay, for the current reporting period that's open for the monthly reporting, how many of my subsidiaries haven't started doing anything yet, are in progress but aren't finished, or are fully compliant and have submitted all the documents they're supposed to submit for that package. So at a very quick high-level view, I can say, hey, out of my 24 subsidiaries, 20 of them are finished, 2 of them are still working on it, and 2 of them, I don't know what they're doing. They haven't submitted a single document in there. I better pick the phone up and call those 2 folks and find out what's going on there. And likewise, I mean, we could use that same data that's in the system to drive workflows from an alerting point of view. Maybe we want reminders to say, hey, do you realize you still got 2 more documents you have to upload? Or hey, do you realize you haven't started filing anything? You better get on it. The reporting period closes in 3 days. We need to get this stuff from you. So you can put a lot of automation around that. And because we've got all the strong metadata and typing in there, it allows us to build those processes. We can even get more granular and start to look at, from start of working to completed on that reporting period, how long do our subsidiaries take to do that? You've got all that data there. You can build those dashboards and start to put some analytics around that. So it really lights up a lot of possibilities in terms of how do you get visibility to your processes and determine where things are working, and if they're not, how to take action on that. That was our first customer. So I'm going to pause for a second here, just take a quick sip of water. Okay, so the second one is kind of the opposite. It's not about collecting documents from folks outside your organization. It's about distributing documents outside your organization. And this is a really sort of timely, important one here. It's about emergency preparedness response plans, EPRP. And it's about how do we keep community first responders along river systems notified of emergency plans. So if something bad happens, does police, fire, hospital, municipal all have the plans in place to deal with that and work with that? So this is a large organization, province-wide across the Ontario province. And basically what they do is they author these plans in SharePoint Online, and we use our extranet publisher product to publish them to an Azure website. So in this case, they're not actually coming into SharePoint Online, but the documents originated there, and then we publish them out to this separate site. We're using Extranet User Manager to manage access into that portal, but what we can do then is closely track and audit exactly what those people are doing. Now, we could have done that in SharePoint Online as well. There's rich audit features. We could track all that activity. We just felt, again, the SharePoint experience sometimes is a little overwhelming for these folks. Can we keep it very simple and have a very branded, bespoke portal that's easy to come into to say, here's what you haven't taken action on, and here's the past history of what you've worked on. And obviously, we need email notifications that go out, so it notifies them when there's new versions, and then a Power BI dashboard so we can analyze all the audit history and say, okay, who's taken action, who's downloaded the documents, who hasn't. So let's kind of go through that scenario here. So I won't take you through the portal side of it, but I want to use this as an example on the Power BI side. And this is just some dummy demo data that we've got up in here, but it gives you a quick sense of some of the things that we can do. So we've got what's called slicers in Power BI, so we can pick a particular time range. Maybe we're only interested in activity over the last month, and let's see how things are going from that point of view. And we can see the number of documents that are published to different river systems that have downstream first responders that need to be aware of from that point of view. And we can track the people that have been tagged to say, hey, these are responsible parties for each of those river systems. How long have they taken to take action on them? Have they taken action in less than 1 day from when we notified them about them, or have they not downloaded? This doesn't actually show it. We've got a number of other buckets, like did it take them from 1 to 3 days, 3 to 7 days, greater than 7 days, or they haven't downloaded, so you can kind of lump them into different buckets from there. The buckets are arbitrary. We can have the Power BI dashboard built in any sort of structure that makes sense from that point of view. And we can see how that maps across different visualizations here. This is a screenshot, so it's not interactive, but the beauty of Power BI is this is all interactive. I can change my slicer, I can pick a different region, I can click on a different river system, and all the other visuals update as part of that. And I actually see the details of, for each person, how many files have they downloaded, what have they not downloaded, what's outstanding from that point of view, what are the details of the document. So I can drill as deep as I want down that data through there. And I can take different views from that. I can look at it at the region level rather than at the river system level, so kind of take it up at a higher level, but still have that user details in there. So once you've got your data model built in Power BI, applying different visualizations like this becomes really easy, and you can start to make some really interesting things. You know, I shudder when I see massive, wide and long Excels with rows and columns and numbers. It becomes really overwhelming to try and understand what the data is actually telling you. You know, it feels like you're in the matrix and things are rippling down through there. I found things like these Power BI visualizations actually answer the questions for you. You know, how many documents have been downloaded, haven't been downloaded, how long do people take to download them? Those are business questions that people are asking that need answers to. And these visualizations very quickly allow you to answer those questions. So that's the second scenario. You know, the first more a collection, the second more a distribution. You can blend those together. You can have the same sort of analytics that I talked about here, applying to that financial reporting as to have people submitted things on time. How are they doing in terms of closing their reporting periods off? Okay. So our third scenario, this one's actually a very complex one. The workflow is a lot more involved than the previous two scenarios that we've talked through. So the scenario is, there's a manufacturer, they manufacture highly engineered products. They build packages of 2D and 3D CAD drawings that need to be reviewed and approved by their customers. They use SAP as their ERP system, so all these jobs are managed through SAP. So we wanted to have integration into that as part of that. So we didn't build the drawing package preparation part. They had an existing process that did that took things out of CAD and out of SAP and built these drawing packages, but then they would manually email it, and there'd be a lot of emails going back and forth in terms of going through that approval process. And really what we've done is built a portal to automate that process. It's still actually a work in progress. We actually haven't launched it live. We're in final stages of QA on it right now. So basically the way the workflow works is that you know, there may be a requirement before this goes out to the customer to have a final step for the technical service engineer who's on that account to review to say, yeah, this is good to go to the client. So that internal engineering approval may be required first. Then the customer gets notified to say, hey, you've got a new package here. They basically have 3 days to respond to that. Otherwise, their ship date gets put at risk in terms of manufacturer planning processes point of view. So there's reminder notifications to say, hey, every 24 hours, if we haven't seen something from you, send a reminder out through there. And then when everything's approved and completed, it actually hooks back into SAP again to update the order status. And there is the ability for customers to annotate documents, to add additional documents and push them back in the portal. So it's kind of a combination of the first two scenarios where we're pushing documents out to the external parties, but we're also collecting some documents back from them. So this next slide is a little overwhelming, but it takes you through the workflow process. And let me zoom in on parts of it here. So we start up at the top. This JSON file, I don't have the SAP part in this workflow. This is basically where we pick it up, where SAP in their drawing package preparation builds this package and it drops it in a SharePoint drop-off library. And that triggers a workflow that starts this whole process. And our workflow reads a file that got prepared by that. It's a system generated file that has all the information about who's the customer and the job number and all those sorts of details. So first we need to understand, hey, is this a customer that's ever come through this portal before or not? If it's not, you know, we need to create a customer folder. We create a group in our Extranet User Manager product that's going to allow that customer access into that portal. So we give them permissions through there. And we use the same idea that I was explaining in the original financial reporting, where we create a document set that represents that sales order. So everything from that drawing package is going to go into that document set, and it's going to be tagged with metadata around that job. You know, if the customer folder already exists and this is a brand new sales order, I just go straight to creating the document set. If it's update to an existing one, I kind of skip further down the process and upload some new documents into that. So there's sort of 3 different entry points depending on the customer scenario. But at the end of that, you know, basically we've got the actual population of the customer contacts. So this comes from SAP. We populate that group so that customer has access in. It's not typically one person. There's usually multiple parties on the customer side. And then we get to a decision point in the workflow. We say, hey, is internal engineering approval required before this goes out? If it is, notify the TSE, get their approval. Otherwise, if it's not, just go straight to getting the customer approval. Or sorry, no, this is actually just marking it as approved by the TSC if they don't need to actually explicitly approve it. Then we send a digest email to the customer saying, hey, there's a bunch of drawing documents here that you need to review and approve. And if the customer approval is required, it goes through the approval process, it waits for the customer, it sends reminders every 24 hours, has 3 days passed with no approval, start sending those reminders, and ultimately it's either going to come to a rejected or approved. So if it's rejected or approved, actually both cases, they're going to send a notification to the TSC. Obviously in the rejection path, they're going to need to reach out, understand what needs to happen, maybe make some changes to the drawings, prepare an update and go through that process again. If it's all set and it's yes through here, at the end process here, again, doesn't show it here, but there's actually a connection over to SAP that does an update on that order in SAP. Now it's cleared for manufacturing. It can go onto the shop floor and go into the queue from that point of view. So like I said, fairly sophisticated workflow, all done through Logic Apps, so using the same sort of tool that I showed you in that first scenario. So we can visually draw out these rules, put these different paths in here, and build that workflow process through there. So that was our third scenario. We've got one left here that I want to touch on, is around supplier certifications. So this is a fairly simple one. In fact, you could argue perhaps we could do this with a OneDrive request file scenario. This particular client's got a couple hundred external suppliers, and they've got annual compliance reporting requirements around those. They need to know that they've got up-to-date insurance certificates, so they have to be receive a named certificate showing that that they're up to date from a policy point of view, and they need to sign code of conduct form from a supplier code of conduct and ethics point of view. So we need a fairly simple portal to upload documents through there, and we want to auto tag those based on the logged in supplier. So we didn't want to use the OneDrive for Business scenario because that free form, just type in your name as part of the upload, is pretty loose from that point of view. We want a little bit more control around that, because again, we're going to use Power BI to manage this process and say, okay, which of our suppliers are in compliance or out of compliance, or even if we look 3 months forward from now, who's going to be expiring that we should be proactive and chase them down and get those certificates and get things in place from that point of view, so we don't have an out of compliance scenario from that point of view. So another scenario from there. Now I forgot on the previous scenario on the engineering drawing one, actually started us down a whole different product path, and it's something that we're thinking of using in all of these scenarios. So this is kind of a first look that I'm going to share with you on what that could look like. So if we come in here, this is still a tentative name for the product, Extranet Documents, but it's basically for managing that document distribution and collection process. And you notice it looks a fair bit like the first scenario where we had the SharePoint Online page with the web part on it. It's basically that idea, but we're not doing it in SharePoint Online. We're doing it in a separate branded application, so we can completely control that user experience. I mean, we simplified things with the web part to drag and drop documents in on the SharePoint Online side, but there's still a lot of choices and options around there. One of the things that I kind of breezed over was when I was dragging and dropping documents in here, I may have filtered down into a particular subsidiary folder in through here, but this web part doesn't know that. And when I drag documents in there, it's still going to ask me to pick the subsidiary and pick the period through there. It doesn't know that I've already done some navigation in the portal through here. Having those web parts talk to each other and understand that gets really tricky technically within SharePoint Online. It's doable, you can do it, but basically you need to refactor these out of the box web parts, so there's a fair bit more customization as part of that. So we decided, what, it's actually easier for us to do that outside in an external portal altogether. So we can read, in this case, it's drawing packages, it could be financial reporting packages. I mean, these basically represent that document set concept. So it would be all the open document sets that I have access to as a person coming into the portal. And the idea, as we're building the product, is that these columns that we see here are obviously very specific to each customer scenario. They would just come from SharePoint list views in SharePoint. So you define a view saying, this is how I want to look in the portal. Even though the portal is not in SharePoint Online, it can still read from SharePoint Online and say, okay, we want these 4 columns on our list here for our document sets. So in this case, we're picking an engineering drawing package document set, and the lower grid then pops open and says, here's all the documents that are in that document set that you've picked. I can click on them to view them, I can download them, I can do different things with them. In this scenario here, I may annotate one of these drawings and need to send it back to the TSE because they got to do some engineering changes because we didn't quite get it right first pass through there. So I do a very similar experience where I grab a document here and drop it in here. And what we haven't built in this mock-up yet is that same pop-up that we were showing over on this portal here would pop up with whatever metadata we would need to capture. It would submit to a logic app. It would put it in the right customer documents folder for the drawing package that's applicable. It could send a notification to the TSE to say, hey, customer just dropped some new drawing files into this particular drawing package. So you can build the workflow processes around both sides. And the key is that this becomes a very brandable, customizable experience. So you can tailor it exactly to what you want to communicate to your customers, to your partners, to your subsidiaries, whatever your scenario becomes through there. It becomes very easy for them to use this because it's very specific to that particular use case. But that customization is not super hard to do. I can go into SharePoint, I can define different columns for these views here, have it show up in my portal. I can take our extranet documents branding off of here and put my company branding in there. All the emails that are going back and forth are fully branded to my organization and really tie it together from that point of view. So all 4 of those scenarios we see moving to this. We're still a couple months away from having this fully baked and ready, but I wanted to share some ideas, get some thoughts going. If any of this resonates with yourselves and you're interested in how this could be used in your organization, product planning is still happening. So this is an opportune time to say, hey, what about this or that? As we prioritize features and think about what our MVP, our minimum viable product first release of this looks like. So from there, I think the balance of the deck for the most part is pretty much done at this point. We have sort of some background slides in there, but why don't we just kind of wrap up to the wrap-up points from here. Logan or Eric, if there's particular Q&A that you want to draw my attention to, feel free to jump in there as well.
No, I think we're in good shape from a question perspective. Okay.
So from a wrap-up points point of view, that request file does work for the right scenario. It's really handy. It's really easy if you weren't sure, you weren't aware that it existed. Remember, it's not a SharePoint Online feature. It's a OneDrive for Business feature. So you have to go into your OneDrive for Business to be able to do that. Just create a folder, select it, and you'll see the request files light up in the ribbon for you. The standard sharing features work really well as well. This drag and drop web part that I showed you is fairly customizable as well. So I mean, that's another thing to consider. Reach out to us if you're interested in that. We're not sure if we're going to productize that web part itself or whether that'll be sort of an as needed implementation. Really, we're pushing more down that extranet documents product that I was just mentioning. Figure out what portal option makes the most sense for you. Part of it is also just the scale. How many external folks are you talking about here? How onerous is that? How many documents? What's the frequency around that? There's always a cost-benefit decision to be made there. How customized do we need to go? How branded do we need to go? How important is that to us as an organization? And how much automation do we want to put in as part of that? Just some other wrap-up points on different topics. I'm doing a couple of webinars later this month and the beginning of May. These are more technical in nature. The first is around secure development practices. How do you use things like Azure AD to improve your security? A lot of the things that I'm showing you here, I haven't gone under the hood as to how we make those processes secure. That session is really going to crack the covers on that side and show you what that looks like. And then the second section is more on software development lifecycle. How do how do you build dev, test, production environments? How do you manage your code from a source code point of view, use things like Git and Azure DevOps and pipelines and continuous integration. Again, fairly technical session, but if you're interested in how to bring some best of class enterprise processes to your organization, even if you're not an enterprise, it's pretty available for any size organization. And then lastly, a different topic again, doing one later in May on integrating multiple planner boards into Power BI. So kind of continuing on the Power BI theme. We've done a lot of work as part of our templating to say, hey, in addition to templating SharePoint sites and Microsoft Teams and OneNotes, often Planner comes into that discussion as well. And as you get many planners in your organization, how do you roll that up? How do you do portfolio management and such? Power BI is a great way to do that. And we've got some open source code we're going to be publishing as part of that event around how we harvest and collect that and feed that into Power BI, because there's not out of the box connections from that point of view. So with that, if there aren't any further questions, I want to thank everybody for joining this afternoon. Hope the session was helpful, and absolutely, if you've got questions or thoughts on what you've heard here, as you can see, we're very much in product planning phases here. I'd love to get your feedback. If there was something that you particularly loved or something that you felt was a gap, by all means, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. With that, I'll give everybody 9 minutes back over their lunch over, depending on your time zone. And thanks very much for joining us.